So back in March I bought Chrono Trigger on a whim and finally gave this cult classic a try. Don't know, for some reason I was never really tempted to play this game since this game never got a European release until the DS port in 2009. It kinda went under my radar. I was somewhat aware of its reputation in the US, but since no one I knew ever really talked about it, there was no real push to try it out like it was for the case with Final Fantasy, for example. The only thing I really knew about the game going in was that it is about time travel, obviously, that the main character is named Chrono, and that Akira Toriyama designed the characters. So what do I think of this game? Well, let's dive in. So, Chrono Trigger, what is this game about? Well, let me explain the basic premise, so mild spoilers ahead I guess. You play as Chrono, or however you want to call him, your local silent protagonist. And guess what? The fair is in town! But not any fair, the millennial fair that celebrates the founding of the kingdom 1000 years ago. At the fair you run into a girl named Marley, or however you want to call her. You have some fun gathering silver points and trade them in for a variety of prizes, until you go and meet your childhood friend, #NotBoma. Luca, who developed a teleporter and shows it off at the fair. Marley volunteers to try it out, but her magic pendant accidentally opens a rift in space and time, and she disappears. You, Chrono, being a total simp, don't hesitate to go after the girl you only met like 10 minutes ago, even though you have no freaking clue what just happened. So you travel 400 years into the past, where it turns out that Marley was mistaken for the missing Queen Lini, since, as it turns out, she is actually called Princess Nadia, and a descendant of Queen Lini. Stupid thing is though that cause everyone thinks Marley is Lini, no one bothers to look for the missing queen, resulting in Marley being erased from the timeline.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
But don't worry, it's not too late. Queen Lini is still alive, so all you have to do to restore the timeline is to go out and save her. And yeah, you do that. Travel back to the present and surprise surprise, Chrono is accused of having kidnapped Nadia, and after a kangaroo court, he's sentenced to death. But before you get executed, you manage to break out of prison and escape through another time gate. That's what they are called, by the way. This gate, however, leads into a post-apocalyptic future. After some investigation, you find out that this cataclysm was caused by a creature named Lavos in the year 1999. Seeing how things turned out, Chrono, Marley, and Luca decide that they should use the time gates to prevent the future from happening. On the journey, they travel through 5 different time periods, making new friends, recruiting a humanoid frog, a robot, and a cave cat woman, and an optional party member. Each time period has its own plot going on that are all interconnected to some degree, making a whole. One thing I think is rather interesting about the whole plot is that there isn't really any personal investment for the main characters. From Chrono's point of view, the world will end in 1000 years, so it isn't really of any direct concern to him. He could just lean back and enjoy a long and happy life. Well, at least in theory. He is supposed to be executed, but they kinda drop that plot point. It only comes up at the very end of the game, at which point I almost forgot about it, and that's kinda weird. Anyway, essentially there isn't really anything at stake for the main characters outside of their individual storylines. They try to save the world, but not because they are forced to, but rather simply because it is the right thing to do. They just want to make things better, and just have happened to have the means to do it, as they can travel through time. They aren't in a race against the clock either. Because of that, the game feels like a rather light-hearted adventure, even if stuff gets rather dark at several points. Besides that, every time period has a more or less self-contained storyline, at least at the first glance. Everything is somewhat connected, sometimes in a rather obvious way, sometimes rather subtle. Thanks to the time travel gimmick, you get a pretty good idea of the history of this world, and it's pretty well integrated into the story, ignoring the fact that some of the time travel mechanics are kinda questionable, but you know, that's something you just gotta accept with time travel stories. It's kinda neat though. There are several places you can visit in multiple time periods, which will for example contain the same chests. If you loot a chest in the past first, they will be empty in the future. But if you loot them in the future first and then go back to the past, you get twice the items, which is of course a time paradox, but a neat little detail. Besides, this game also gives you the option to pretty much skip the entire game and jump straight to the end boss. Well, okay, the first time around you have to at least reach the point where you learn about Lava's existence, and even then he will probably kick your ass unless you do some heavy level grinding. But look at that, Chrono Trigger is apparently literally the game that invented the term New Game Plus, which I haven't actually bothered to play yet, because I felt more like finally playing that Final Fantasy XV DLC I bought 2 years ago. In New Game Plus, you can challenge Lavos at the very beginning of the game, alone, without any help. But why would you do that? Well, Chrono Trigger has a bajillion different endings, and you unlock them by beating Lavos at different points in the game. Sadly, the game is otherwise rather linear. There isn't any actual story branching, only a couple of scenes that may play out a bit differently depending on your choices, but still, considering that the game was originally released in the 90s, that was rather impressive, and I'm pretty sure that it's fun to see what all the different endings have in store. What is also certainly helping is that the game is not particularly long. Well, by JRPG standards that is. It took me about 25 hours to beat the game on my first playthrough. Doesn't mean that the game feels short, by the way. It has rather fast pacing for sure, but it doesn't feel rushed. The story is exactly as long as it needs to be, and this fast pace is what makes this game so fun. Nothing drags on for too long, and it always feels like you're making some notable progress, even if you're playing the game for just an hour. And that's pretty motivating. I love JRPGs like Final Fantasy, but often it feels not worthwhile playing them unless I have several hours to spare. But you can pick up Chrono Trigger for an hour and just have a good time. This makes this game pretty great for mobile devices. Makes you wish that there was a Switch port. I mean, come on, it just celebrated its 25th anniversary in March and they didn't announce anything or add it to the SNES emulator. What a wasted opportunity! Besides that, it's pretty straightforward. I rarely actually had to look up where to go and most fights were pretty easy, though some of the later bosses are rather challenging. Of particular note was this one boss that kept spamming magic attacks that can kill your entire party within a couple of turns or at best force you into a never-ending loop of healing yourself, until I finally got the idea to look at the items I collected so far. It struck me as rather odd that almost all the chests on the Mountain of Foes contained the same item, a barrier sphere. Since I hardly ever use consumable items in JRPGs except for perishable healing items, I never really bothered to look what those actually do. Turns out they cut sustained magic damage by 1/3. Go figure. Using these, the battle was suddenly a piece of cake. I'm rather torn if I should consider this great game design because the game provided you with exactly what you needed to beat this monster, even if it required some outside the box thinking, or if I should hate it because a story boss shouldn't require you to use consumable items you might not have on hand because you didn't go out of your way to loot these barrier spheres on your way to the boss, or already use them up against some random encounters on the way to it. It's not like you can buy these on mass at this point. Okay, to be fair, I'm sure that with the right team composition and strategy, you can beat him without relying on this item. But I think it's pretty obvious what the intended strategy is here. And this being an RPG, of course, means that the old-fashioned level grind is also an option. But then again, one thing that makes Chrono Trigger so appealing is that you don't really need to grind. Speaking of which, I really enjoyed that the game didn't really have any random encounters. Every group of monsters you fight has a specific spawn point that resets each time you switch between screens, and you see most of them on the map. So you can actually avoid a lot of battles with ease. However, some of them jump at you without warning and some are just plain unavoidable. Especially the latter can make backtracking a pain sometimes. Especially in that one extra dungeon added in the DS remake where you slide down the mountain and can't quite see where you're going, and if you don't take the right path you have to go up the mountain again, forcing you to fight the same group of monsters over and over again. That was just plain annoying. But still, the fact that you don't get forced into a fight every 5 steps and that the game doesn't have to load a better screen but rather just lets you duke it out where you are, probably is also one of the reasons why the pace of this game feels so much faster than your typical JRPG. I also found the gameplay to be a rather refreshing take on the typical turn-based combat. It's similar to Final Fantasy in that you have to wait for an action bar to fill for each character before they can take an action, but the game doesn't wait for you to give commands. Enemies will attack you as soon as they can, so you can't waste too much time thinking what to do. Obviously not the first or last JRPGs that use this sort of system, but what also makes it rather interesting is that you have double and triple attacks that allow 2 or 3 characters to combine their powers to unleash devastating combo moves. The catch is that the action time bar of every character involved in that double or triple attack needs to be full. So you sometimes need to wait for the bar of your second or third character to fill up. For example, Chrono is a fast character, but Robo is very slow and takes a sweet time. So if you want to use one of their double attacks, you have to wager if you want to wait until Robo can act or if you want to take a move with Chrono in the meantime. The right timing, especially during the endgame, can greatly affect the outcome of a battle. That's why I ended up using Marley for most boss battles, since she is the only character that learns haste, which lets you act much faster. Well, and last but not least, there's of course the overall presentation. As I already mentioned earlier, the characters were designed by Akira Toriyama, and while some characters do look like they were taken straight out of Dragon Ball, they are, for the most part, really eye-catching and charming, and they translate very well into rather expressive sprites. Also, I'm not sure how much Toriyama was involved in the production of the game outside art direction, but the story certainly felt like something Toriyama would write. At least the tone very much reminded me of the original Dragon Ball. I'm pretty sure that they at least consulted him, and that's a positive, by the way. And then there's of course the music composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu, the god of JRPG music. I'm a sucker for his music, and Chrono Trigger, while the game doesn't exactly have everything as epic as a One-Winged Angel or Dancing Mad, features some truly beautiful tracks that excel at setting the mood of any given scene. I just love it. And with that being said, let's wrap things up. Chrono Trigger is an excellent game, and I would highly recommend to give it a try. It has a very lovely presentation and a fun gameplay loop, an intriguing story, and fun characters. And really, I cannot stress enough that the game has excellent pacing. It exactly knows what story it wants to tell and doesn't waste your time at any moment. I would actually say that it aged much better than contemporaries, making it somewhat of a timeless classic. I played the Steam version of the game, by the way. Some might say the SNES or DS version is superior, but it's kinda hard to get your hands on those, especially if you're living in Europe. But what about you? Ever played Chrono Trigger? Did you like it? Do you want me to talk about more games? Let me know in the comments below. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well. Sometimes you can be too smart for your own